Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Los Alamitos Unified School District Board of Education to order. This is the workshop portion of our meeting, and we were going to start this with a roll call. Ms. D'Angelo.
Mrs. Catulli.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson.
Here.
Mrs. Hill.
Here.
Mr. Fayette.
Here.
And Mr. Forehand.
Here.
Okay, we're all here. The next item is the adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
I so move.
I second. Okay, is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Approved unanimously. We're now on to community and staff participation, and I believe we do have some input.
Yes, Madam President, we did receive a public comment submitted for the workshop portion that I will go ahead and read at this time. And the public comment is from Carrie Logue. Good afternoon, school board trustees. Thank you for your continued work and consideration for revising facility use rates. As the executive director of LAIF, this is a topic that has a large impact on our small foundation. It is our pleasure and honor to be the district's nonprofit partner and to provide after-school and summer enrichment programs, as well as free programs for STEM and world language, and free scholarships to families in need. We also give grants to the district to fund STEAM initiatives and mental health wellness, $80,000 in 2020 alone. LAIF solely exists to enhance the educational excellence for all Los Alamitos Unified School District kids, from pre-K to 12th grade. LAIF pays facility fees for use via an annual negotiated MOU based on our nonprofit rates. The amounts for the current and past 2 years are $80,000 for 2020-21, $110,000 for 19-20, and $100,000 for the 18-19 year. Should the school board decide to allow LAIF to use facilities at a reduced rate or eliminate fees altogether, LAIF would invest these additional funds in 1, providing more free enrichment opportunities, 2, providing more grants to the district, and or 3, reducing fees for enrichment programs. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pulver. Okay, we are now going to have a workshop on our facility use rates, and I believe CJ Nolan will be joining us via Zoom, or is Dr. Nyang going to introduce him?
Director CJ Nolan to start. No
Okay.
problem. He's ready to go.
Thank you. You're on, CJ.
All right, Your Honorable, thank you, Madam President, Honorable trustees. I just wanted to pick up where we left off from our last board workshop on the facility use framework and cost analysis and the overall grouping scenarios and how we're going to organize each of these items. So if you recall from the last board workshop, we had these 8 options where we primarily nailed it down to between option 1, option 4, and option 7. And with option 7, with each of these, with option 1, we're primarily delineating our non-paid or not with paid staffing and volunteer staffing. And then with option 4, we also have the city partners and LAIF separated into 2 groups with the volunteer staffing and the paid staffing. And then on to group 7, we continue to have LAIF and our city partners separated. And then we also have our volunteer staffing and paid staffing. But on top of that, we also have youth and community-based as additional factors that we wanted to consider or prioritize.
So just as a reminder for the public and for the board and new trustee members, that this is our 3rd workshop on this topic. We've decided to kind of dissect it into 2 parts, just really today focusing on our user groups, and then we'll later look at fee structures that are associated with the user groups. And at our board meeting in November, the workshop, when we took a look at these options, the board gave just some direction that we thought we would come back today and coalesce and try to make it smaller. So Mr. Nolan will be presenting 4 options that the board could consider that really are going to touch upon the different points, but we always leave a blank column just in case you have new ideas that have emerged. So take it away, CJ.
Right, and if we go on to the next slide, we kind of simplified it to those 4 options and that blank column. like I said, the first option is primarily prioritizing the criteria of nonprofit, non-paid staffing or volunteer staffing versus paid staffing. In option 4, it is that same criteria for the nonprofit, but we're also separating LAIF and our city partners group. And then with option 7A and 7B, we are also introducing a youth or community-based criteria along with the volunteer versus non-paid versus paid staffing, excuse me. So as we have these options, it really leaves us with 2 questions on how do we want to proceed with our group 2 and organizing that group with LAIF and our city partners, and what exactly are the criteria that we want to distinguish for our nonprofits. And if we want to distinguish more than one, is that something that each of the criteria is treated equally, or is one criteria something that we want to weight heavier than the others?
So I'm going to go back to the chart because I think it's a bit easier to see as Mr. Nolan laid it out for you. So really option 1 and 4 would kind of potentially go together. The only difference between option 1 and option 4 is whether or not LAIF should have its separate user group distinction than the city. So in option 1, they're combined in the same user group, and in option 4, they are separated. Now, this really would be most likely for how you allocate fee structure. Not necessarily, but if you wanted to give us different direction, it could be for how you prioritize the spaces. For the most part, LAIF and the city, our city partners, don't really compete for space. It's really about whether it would be for rates. And so the difference in 7A and 7B continues to separate LAIF and the city partners, depending if you want them lumped together or separated. And it seemed like from the 2 workshops we've had, the board already seemed to coalesce, but we wanted to confirm that as we're finalizing, that they wanted to be able to have different groupings for nonprofits that are volunteer-based than nonprofits that are paid staffing. And so if you might recall in November, we even started getting it more confusing in some long options because you could get really confusing to take a look at, well, the difference in 7 from the 1 and 4 is really about, do we give a priority to groups that are localized here within our community? And operationally, when the city has organized things, we have that when they organized the fields, it was about, I think the requirement was that they had to have 70% of individuals. They probably can't see your faces on camera, so our chairs are too low. So they had to have about 70% of students or adults live within our community or reside within our schools for the community-based. And so we got too nuanced, I think, last time when we said, well, should it matter if it's a nonprofit, youth-based, or community-based, like let's say a Friday Night Lights in Fountain Valley wanting to use our fields or a Friday Night Lights here. And we really coalesced, our team decided it really, after it's community-based, it shouldn't matter if it's Friday Night Lights, if they have a paid volunteer staffing, or if they have a non-paid. They're really not part of our community wanting to utilize our fields. And so we simplified that. And so what you'll see is after the community-based in 7A and in 7B, we're simply just saying all other nonprofits. Doesn't matter if they're paid staffing or not. That's probably too much for it to have to be nuanced. And we don't get a lot of people from, I'm making up cities now. I could say Garden Grove. I'm just making up cities who could potentially try to use our facilities if we had the open space. And so I believe the board would probably coalesce around option 7A or 7B. It seems like in the past conversations, this is, like I said, this is our third, that you wanted to find a way to prioritize people who live within our community utilizing our facilities. But that certainly would be the pleasure of up to you. You could make it more complicated and say youth and community, or simply just community, whether it's an adult league or whether it's a student league. You know, there's the different conversations of they are our taxpayers that helped us raise funds for these facilities, et cetera, whether adults or kids. And so that's really going to be the discussion that the board would have. And then if there are new options that emerge, but now's the time to kind of talk about these options and either give us direction, ask more questions for us to clarify. What we hope today is that we can get consensus on one of these 4 groupings, unless you come up with a 5th grouping, then we could write it in as we're talking.
Where do club teams fall in this?
Yeah.
Where do club teams fall? Like club soccer, Galaxy-sponsored events, where do they fall?
Mr. Nolan?
Like teams that are from different areas that comprise our area and outside areas. Is that what we're asking?
Yeah, where the players pay the
So
coach.
as a tournament, they would be considered as an all other nonprofit. If it includes, if it would include organizations from outside of our community, as well as organizations inside of our community, then it would go as a all other nonprofit.
Unless they would have to be categorized as a nonprofit. So if the club is it is not a nonprofit, legally a nonprofit, they would be a profit organization, which would be Group 7 and 7A. They would be Group 6 and 7B. So it'll really depend on their nonprofit status.
My question has to do with adult usage on the fields. I believe in exercise for life for all. I believe they are our taxpayers and they help support us. And I also believe they're bigger and tougher on our poor fields. So I guess my question is, do we really, do we have I don't even know if CJ, if you can answer this question, is there a percentage that you could tell me on adult by use on our fields? Our basketball courts, that's fine. I'm not worried about our asphalt, but I am worried about our turf fields. And if we have a bunch of adults running up and down the field, that's going to be a lot tougher on it than even Friday Night Lights. So could you give me some information?
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So that might be the exact perfect reason why you would want to promote a youth versus adult category. By having them in separate categories, you can apply a different fee. You can also distinguish them by the fee structure as well, where a youth would have less of a fee than an adult only group. That would cover any additional wear and tear on our fields.
Thank you. Diana?
So
2 things. Go ahead,
if
CJ.
we separated if we had the nonprofit criterias, separate them by youth, like a youth sport or a youth organization, then that way we would be able to charge a different rate than we would if it was an adult only organization. Okay. So basically each of these groups is able to, we're able to separate them either by rate or scheduling priority.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions. So the city has both. They have youth and they have adult leagues. So how could we equalize that, or is that not as much of a consideration from the city perspective, just from their youth compared to their adult?
You could. One of the ways we talked about doing something differently in a different scenario, which we could apply here, is you could say when you're talking about rates, for youth, we're going to add another 5% discount. I'm making a number up. It could be 10. It could be 2. I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So that way, that discount applies to all of them, rather than creating. Because if you want to now differentiate between youth and community-based, you're going to probably now expand these groups to
Right.
8 or 9 or more.
And I like, that seems simplistic and across the board to me, because If we did it for an adult league that wasn't run by our city, but we didn't do it for the adult leagues run by our city, that's not equity to me. And then the other thing is, we talked about before, and I still get stuck on this, the difference between volunteer staff and paid staff, even though they're a nonprofit. And I just want to once again make a case. One, how are we going to decide what that is? Is it anybody who's paid? Or is it a threshold of somebody who's paid? How are we going to make that determination on those groups? So I'd like to know what that criteria would look like. And I still believe that if we charged more, that's going to get passed on to our families and to the students. And I don't believe it's going to impact the group or who's running the group. I believe it's going to impact who we're trying to serve, which is our families, and because we don't have any control over what they charge. So if we charge more as a business person, I'd be passing that charge on. So those were the two things that I had questions about.
So if that is a criteria that we no longer want to consider, that because we are concerned that it may pass that cost on to our students or community, then we could definitely remove it from the criteria and only focus on youth versus adult, and then community versus non-community.
We would want to make sure before we take that off the table that a representative of all 5 board members, but really the question is, how would we operationalize determining a paid volunteer, a volunteer staff nonprofit and a paid staff nonprofit?
Right. My understanding was it would be if the coaches or the direct representatives of the team or the organization were paid, then that would be pretty much the criteria that would put them into the paid category.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, so
And
now I have a follow-up
in many
question to-
cases, I'll just say, I think many cases, coaches themselves are probably volunteer. It's
Yeah.
really the organization aspect. But technically, any nonprofit has to file, a 1099, or there's some
It's a
form. I know my brother
1099
runs a nonprofit, and he can go on and take a look at any nonprofit and find out what staff are paid, et
Right.
cetera. So.
But to Marlis's point, when she was talking about club teams, they could be run operationally as a nonprofit, but the coaches
That's
make
true.
a salary.
Clubs-
That's
Yep.
that's their livelihood.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of nuances when it comes to making that determination. And for me, it's, and I look at the difference between a club league, which is very elite, right? And this is children that are gathered from all over the place, but they're using our facilities, and the coach is getting paid for the job they're doing. And then we look at a Friday Night Lights, where we know that the upper staff is getting paid and referees are getting paid and things like that. But there are all the coaches are volunteer. The kids are in our community. So that's kind of to me, we're not looking at apples to apples, and how do we create a criteria where there is that kind of equity across the board.
I think one thing that we have to look at is some of the nonprofit that actually makes a profit actually franchise out the business. AYSO, the only people that are truly paid salaries are at a national level.
Yeah.
LAJB, I mean, your husband was president, we're president. I mean, it's down to families bring the donuts. And I just feel like LaSalle Junior Baseball, AYSO, groups like that function at the very lowest levels economically they can, and the only thing they charge for is the equipment, and the jerseys. And baseball, at the baseball field, you do pay refs, or umpires, but I just feel like there's a distinct difference between a group that can franchise out, and it's a business, and AYSO, and national groups that have existed since our kids were since I was a child, that don't make profit, and literally everything falls back on the coaches. And even down to when they're trained, they have national training, and the only people that are paid are the highest levels of administration that have to run a cross-country organization.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with you, Marlis. I really do. I have nothing against people making if you can do something joyful in your life for your job, go for it, and I'm happy for you. And I do know that they will pass the cost on, and I do know they will say it is our fault. But I really think there is a fundamental difference between an organization, I'm thinking Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, AYSO, and another organization that is a for-profit, even if they have volunteers. And they are performing a service. Friday Night Lights performs a great service. There are a ton of kids there playing. And, I'm kind of jealous I didn't think of it. Because obviously it was a huge need in our community. And if we do charge more, yes, we're going to be putting some people in a situation where they may not be able to afford it. And that breaks my heart. But then I also think of I look at our turf fields, and that breaks my heart because of all the use it gets. So this is a thorny question. But I agree with Marlis.
I just want to remind you, one of the things we are trying to avoid right now is the cost. Because there is a possibility you could take a look, and it's not charging any more now. It's maybe another group is getting a reduced rate if you wanted to do such, or that it doesn't even need to be, we showed you models just for illustration purposes of, I think it was 100%, 75%, 25, 50%, 25%. It doesn't have to go in that. It could be the difference between some of the user groups could be 10%. As opposed to having to be 25. Those were just illustrations. So I think that's why I think it's really kind of more important to get philosophically, and then we can take a look at that and adjust things from when we talk about the rates. If I could help narrow the conversation down so we could kind of maybe chip away at this, because this is our third workshop on it. I think we're pretty clear on group one. Our district-sponsored individuals. So let's take a look at, let's try to piece this out. But should LAIF be its own group who exists solely to support the school districts? Or should they be lumped together with our city partners? Again, you don't have to talk about cost because this is another way where you could make it very small. It's just really, should there be a difference between that group? I personally think LAIF does have to be, LAIF can't be in group one.
Okay, that was what I was going to ask, why it couldn't be in group one.
By theory of being a true nonprofit, there should always be at least an arm's length of an extension between the district and a nonprofit organization. And so I think that would probably be the best way for us to separate something out there. I was more responding to one of the comments of the public comment about, no fees altogether. I just think that wouldn't be wise.
Scott.
I would just like a clarification. So inside of our groups, we've got, and I'm go 7A, 4 and 5 need to be flipped because you got youth behind them in the next category. But so community-based, can we break that up inside that group? Say we're going to say community-based is going to be our group 4. That's where they're going to kind of slot in. Can we delineate or differentiate between the different groups that are community-based versus we got AYSO versus club? They both may pull 70%, hit that threshold of being community-based. Can we have different fee structures within each group? And how much trouble can we get into? I'm worried about people screaming and suing us because we charged more for, Friday Night Lights than we did for AYSO. If we charge more for club for AYSO, even though they're both within that same group category. And how well can we define our groups? How flexible can we be? And what I'm saying is if you look at club, those guys, the coaches, are paid. Well, you go to AYSO, yes, as you go up the threshold, but the expected people on the field when they're playing the game, there's nobody there getting paid. So I don't know if we can delineate that, differentiate that, or if we're starting to get really too far into the weeds and we need to stay
So the one thing that we have to make sure that we can do is that whatever we adopt, that we can enforce it consistently, equitably, and fairly to all groups. And so it would get difficult. And remember, we're right now talking about fields, but I don't know of too many clubs that utilize our fields. But maybe a club would be interested in our pool at some point, you know, and so we would just, I would say that whatever metrics we use, we're gonna have to make sure we can apply unilaterally through that process. And sometimes the more nuanced, the harder it is going to be for staff to have to try to interpret when someone fills out a facilities use fee, what is the right rate? And the more nuanced, that is probably when we could get more in legal trouble because we didn't follow a consistent aspect. But could we charge differently for nonprofit volunteer and nonprofit paid staff? Yes, we could. And can we charge differently for community-based organizations than non-community-based organizations? We can as well.
Okay, Chris, did you want to say anything?
I'm enjoying the conversation and I'm trusting my colleagues about you've come a long way with this. And, you know, my only big concern was with LAIF, and I want to make sure it's more than fair to them. And Scott, I agree that, you know, I was an AYSO coach, so, you know, I know what we did as volunteers, so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
it's
Yeah.
a lot.
Diana?
So let's tackle LAIF and city. Remember, let's go
That's what I
back
was
to
gonna
that
talk
point.
about. So I think that LAIF does deserve a bit of a spiff. I don't, between the city, just because they are our partner. But I don't want to overly burden the city either. I mean, we have had a long relationship with them. They serve our community. They serve our students. You know, because of changes and things that have happened in the economy, you know, I feel that they have been very gracious in saying, no, we really can't manage these fields the way they should be managed, and we'd rather you take that back. And so I don't have a problem with them being separated, but I don't want there to be a big differential between the two.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, yeah. We're so far apart, I sometimes can't see everybody. Scott?
So I agree. I think LAIF and the city partners should be separated out so we can distinguish about, because they do serve different purposes.
Yeah.
The other question is city partners. Now, does that mean all the rec leagues go away? Because my kid plays, you know, rec volleyball through Los Alamitos, or he plays. So will all of those groups now have to come through the district?
Yes.
So all those sports things. So we're talking about the city partners. This is more for classroom space, because we're taking away we're taking on the burden of all the fields.
So for the most part, prior to November 19th or whatever the date was, we scheduled the use of all of our fields except two, McAuliffe and Oak. And the city of Los Alamitos scheduled the use outside groups to use McAuliffe and Oak fields. But we scheduled all of our elementary schools, this field here at the district office, the fields at the high school. And so if someone wanted to, if the city was doing rec department was running something at Rossmore or at Seal Beach, they still would. So it's really, they'll still be able to utilize our facilities. It's just now they'll be running them through us rather than going through the city. The city was almost like a middleman, and now they'll just come through us. But they'll still be available. We will get to decide to what extent. At times, do we think our fields have been overused, et cetera? We will be able to make decisions upon, wow, I think the field needs a little bit of a rest, or we're going to not rest it when this McAuliffe really needs to be able to use this during prime instructional time, et cetera.
Okay. I just want to make a point of clarification because there's something I heard Scott say and I didn't hear you say. If you wanted to sign up for kids volleyball through the city of Los Alamitos, you would continue to do that. Los Alamitos will contact us to get the gym time.
That's correct.
So that
We won't become the Parks and Rec. I'm
right.
sorry,
I just
maybe
wanna
I
make
didn't
sure
understand the
that's clear.
question.
Yeah, okay.
We won't become the city's Park and Rec.
No, we
They'll
won't,
just
yeah.
now rent the facilities through us.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, it didn't seem really clear to me listening to both of you, so.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking there is a consensus on the board, and Chris, if you don't agree, start shaking your head a whole bunch, that we do think that LAIF and the city should actually be separated.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, yay.
So we have consensus that LAIF and the city should be separate. And again, we'll talk about rates at a whole nother meeting, and it doesn't have to be a significant difference there.
Right.
So,
okay.
so now we get down to what I'd like to distinguish, should we go down option 4 or option 7, is do you want to provide a preference for youth or community-based organizations? Before I talk about nonprofits. So should we give a priority, a different group for those that are community-based groups versus a group from another city wanting to use our facilities?
But how much of that do we really get?
Add more to that question.
How often do we really have people outside our city asking to utilize our fields, I would say?
I don't think we get a lot, but either way, our structure should be built to be able to implement it if it was.
Okay.
Mr. Nolan, do you know?
I believe our previous grouping discouraged outside. We did preference our local community in our previous grouping, so that we don't have that situation now. But it doesn't mean that if we remove it, we won't have that situation in the future.
When the
That's good
city
information.
ran Oak and McCullough's fields, and in part of the contract that we had with them, I think is they had to have a 70% threshold to be considered community based. 70% of the individuals participating in that, in AYSO, in Friday Night Lights, et cetera, be either students attending our schools, because you don't have to live within our boundaries to attend our
Right.
schools necessarily, or residents within the district boundaries. They may go to Headways, they may go to a charter school, or
Right.
so.
But their parents are still paying tax dollars in this.
So my recommendation, if it helps, is to keep community-based, because if you don't, that's almost changing what we've been doing when it was prior.
That makes sense. That was good information. Thank you, CJ. I didn't realize that.
So now we are really probably removing option 1 and 4, because we want to have option to provide youth or community. And remember, we kind of talked about, so should we do community and simply give a discount later, look at youth later when we talk about the rates? Or do you want to have youth and community be separate groups? Because then we'll have to expand 7A out more.
I think the youth should be included under community-based, and we can just put a footnote if we want to do that with the fees, because if it's community-based, it's community-based.
And I would do it the opposite way. I
Okay.
would say community-based, but adult, I think that, and I know we're not talking about fees, but I would want to see adult leagues that utilize the field more aggressively pay a little bit of a,
Yeah, well, could we just put in community-based, and then when we get to the fees,
can we,
youth
Youth and
adults?
adult,
Could-
yeah.
I mean, are we creating more work?
No.
You're saying within, you do community-based group 5, and then there's a youth under that and a B adult.
Adult, mhm.
Yeah, can we do that?
You could. So you could take, really, I would see it as 2 options. Taking 7A, and you would have group 1, group 2, group 3. Then group 4 would be youth, community-based, nonprofit. Group 5 would be, so now I'd have to ask you, do you want to do youth, community-based, nonprofit, paid staffing before adult, nonprofit, volunteer staffing?
I think we should do our community adults next.
So you could do community-based, youth, community-based, nonprofit, volunteer, adult, community-based, nonprofit, volunteer. See how it gets too nuanced? Or you simply keep what we have in 7A.
Okay.
and you say we're going to give again, pick a number, 5% discount for youth
Okay.
when we talk about rates. So sometimes I think keeping it simpler is easier
Yeah, I agree.
than having all these other groups, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly open to the pleasure of the board.
Scott, did
So Andrew, one way we could keep it simple as well is we could also have like the all other nonprofit groups to catch everything on the back end. So if we wanted to have 3 groups and just have our youth community-based
Good point.
nonprofit, our adult community-based nonprofit, and then all other nonprofit. that would
Could be the
keep it
adult
simple.
and, good point, I didn't think of that. So group 6 could technically be adults and any other adult nonprofit leagues. Outside of those, I will say that most of our adult leagues are going through a Parks and Rec of a city partner, so we'd
Right.
likely be in group 3.
Right.
And so going back to what Mrs. Hill was saying is, if you're going to charge, are the adults in the city league going to be charged more than the than
Right. The
in-
youth.
than the youth,
The kids
or
that are
less than the youth in the other group, which is
Right.
why I still think it might be. Well, I'll let you guys decide.
Scott has
Well,
something.
that was my question earlier when I was saying about through the city and the rec
Yeah.
leagues, is, where do you slot them in? And if we can just say community-based and then break out the fee structure for the youth, we say they should get a discount. Now, is playing in the over 40 soccer league, we weren't too aggressive on that field. So I don't want you to disparage us like
So
we
you
were
want
ripping those
youth,
up.
adult, and really mature.
That's a very polite way to say it. Thank you. So I'm just saying if we can keep the number of groups kind of contained and not so many of them, but differentiate between the groups and the fee structure.
Right.
I think
Okay.
is appropriate, and I think that's where we're going. But again, if we book through the rec league, are they going at the city partner rate, or are they going at the community-based rate? And is that,
If they go through the city.
So if it was the rec league, it would be group 3 city partners. And so then we would just have to decide, this is why I think it's a rich discussion, is does this rec league through the city youth be at a discounted rate than a youth, than a rec league that's an adult?
So if
And it
group
doesn't have to
4
be, it's really what is your pleasure?
But if group 4 is going to be AYSO, Girl Scouts, or Los Al Junior Baseball, are they going to be charged more than group 3 adults if they fall under city partners?
Yeah.
So that doesn't make sense to me.
But it's the city it's still for our community. It's still for, it's run by our city. So our city runs a softball league. So if we're charging them, we break out another group that says that the youth in community-based nonprofits should be less than the softball league because it's run by the city. Now we're hurting the city Park and Recs program.
Okay, so
I also believe the city subsidizes, I want to say a third of the cost to make it more affordable for our community as well.
Okay. Scott?
and I don't know, we've talked about some of these groups and it's been briefly mentioned, but you've got community-based nonprofit, like the Girl Scouts and the
Yeah.
Boy Scouts, if they want to hold a meeting at the school, obviously their impact is very minimal compared to a Friday Night Lights or an AYSO that are going to do.
But that'll be.
That-
Yeah, you'll
We
see,
said
the
we're gonna
the
rent.
classroom rates
Right.
are very low
Right.
relative to a field rate.
To a field
So it
rate.
really is by the true cost. Yeah.
Well, and we used to have, depending on the usage on the field. So are you a 0.5 because you're doing, I don't know, gymnastics on the field, or are you a 2 because
Yeah.
you're doing rugby on the field? And then,
My understanding is they removed that. The city, it was too complicated to, whether it was rugby or whatnot.
Right.
And so I think that concept, it's from a PRZ report about how do you maintain the field to
Right.
what level. But I believe even the per head fee got removed. Is that correct, Mr. Noland?
so the
That is
capital
correct.
fee, that's right. So
I think it just got lumped into the capital costs. Kind of remember how
Okay.
the formula we shot? That's why I want us to kind of try to stay clear. We'll come back to costs because we'll revisit that formulas and all of that. It's really about user groups.
So Mrs. Davidson, you really feel that an adult city partner should go below a youth a youth group?
Yes. And maybe I'm not seeing the big picture, but just once again, I think back to the amount of kids, like even kids that we adopted in LaSalle Junior Baseball that couldn't even pay those fees. And I don't know about adult leagues, whether or not these are people who are, for the most part, it's not a big deal what they're paying. I'm not sure. I can't make that value judgment. But I think just no matter what, there are two groups that I really want to protect. And you, Diana, are a founding member of LAIF, and it's LAIF and it's the nonprofit volunteer groups that literally everything comes from either parents or the coaches or whoever's in charge, and there is no financial benefit. So those are the two groups that I feel like are the most vulnerable, or LAIF the most beneficial to our kids.
Yeah. So currently, I just want to remind you what the current practice is, I think, but CJ, Mr. Nolan, correct me, is that the city is a different group than a nonprofit group. So,
CJ's nodding.
is that correct, Mr. Nolan?
Correct, yeah.
What we
Yes.
would be doing either way, it sounds like, well, I guess we haven't fully tackled it, but it seems like there was more, not 100% consensus, but between nonprofit volunteer and nonprofit paid. So
I was just going to say, I thought I had heard that we had kind of agreed the nonprofit volunteer staffing, you could actually do youth and adult under it and have perhaps different fees if it's all volunteer. And I don't know if there's going to even be any adult that is all volunteer. And then you could do the communities-based nonprofit paid staffing, youth and adult. You could, it's one category, and then you could have different fees for the youth and for the adults, as opposed to making different categories for adult and for youth.
yes, I think if I understood though,
That's what I heard.
I think Trustee Hill would advocate, but I'm going to let her speak. But what I heard is to put all nonprofits together, regardless if they're paid volunteers or staffings. But I'm not sure if I heard that correctly. That's why I said I'm not sure we have 100% consensus.
I brought up the question. I
Yeah.
will go with my colleagues. I don't want, it wouldn't do me any good to do that. So I believe that all we're doing is passing it down to families. And so I believe that the ones that I can think of serve a tremendous amount of our students. So that's just my point, that I think it's not going to impact, it's going to impact our students and our parents. It's not going to impact the business model. And so to me, that's where I have a difficulty, because now I feel like we're punishing those students, those kids. But I will, if the board feels that strongly about it, of course I will support that.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Okay, I actually feel pretty strongly about that. How do you feel?
I have a question in regard to what she said, and this is CJ Fran. So just because it's in group 3 doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to have a lower rate than group 4. Because we can do in group 4, the community-based, we could have discounts where that number would actually be on par with the city, right? We're not locked into, oh, you're a group 3, you have to pay less than group 4.
If you were to do that, I would recommend just putting them all in group 3 then, because otherwise why have 2 different groups?
Well, I thought it was more for priority of use of fields and things like that also.
We could do a separate one for priority. Right now, this will be eventually the structure we would use for rates. We could do another table if we needed to for how do we prioritize. Because right now, even this wouldn't necessarily say LAIF has priority over AYSO. They may, in theory, we may actually end up doing that, don't get me wrong, but this will most likely be more how we can allocate the fee structure. We could certainly come back and interchange some conversation with the priority.
And at the end of the day, with priority, we will be the ones that are in control of our schedule and who we approve to use our facilities and when.
Chris, do you have a?
No, you got to press.
Green.
Yeah, in the middle.
Okay. When you separated those, that made such sense to me in my organizational mind to see it in that manner.
Okay.
And, you know, I have to rely on, you guys have been involved in this and so much more than I have been. So I'm all for what you guys think's the best.
Okay, so, Scott, I'm not 100% sure with you, so if I say something that you don't agree, throw something at me or interrupt me or whatever. But I am thinking that we are doing the community base, and then later on we'll do youth and adults. And then on group 5 would be community-based nonprofit paid staffing. And then I'm looking at 7A. And except for taking the word youth out, we're good with that. And within within the categories, we will break out when we discuss fees, that for youth and adults. With youth, we're supporting we'll probably give them a discount or something. Is that the consensus of the board?
So I guess I just have a question. Why do we have 6? So I'll go along with you guys with group 4 and group 5. Is all other nonprofits, do they not fall into?
Yeah, I agree.
One
do
of
we
the-
need all other
So
nonprofits?
they don't. Let me explain. So take the word youth out, because remember, we are going to, what
Right.
it sounds like the board wants to provide a discount to youth
Right.
in any of these formats.
Right.
Even through LAIF, which LAIF doesn't do adult stuff right now, but who knows if down the road they did. It would be, let's say that it is someone from Garden Grove. Let's say it is
okay.
Oh, they're not
from
community-based.
Fountain
Got it.
Valley.
Okay,
So
okay.
it may not be too many individuals,
Got it.
but it would be, or a club, and maybe 70% of their individuals aren't. Maybe they only reach the 50% threshold because they're pulling kids from all of Southern California to do
Right.
it, et
Okay.
cetera.
I got it.
Okay. All right. So
That's fine.
as a board, do we want to give direction to pursue 7A, knowing that we want to have youth and adult leagues when we discuss fees separated?
Yes, so I think we're doing group 5 without the word youth, as Dr. Pulver said, and then I can go along with it.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the direction you need, Dr.
I
Paul?
do. So we have option 7A, and when we come back and look at rates, we'll have some preparations to have youth have some type of discount. And it doesn't mean to lock you into this, but I also heard that we should be entertaining that the difference between group 2 and 3, the difference between LAIF and city partners, should not be significant.
Yes.
But we'll still give you options because rates become easy because you can plug in a number. Should it be 10%, 25%, whatever
Right.
it happens to be? That's easier.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you. That was not too painful. When the fees
Was
come
good
up, that is
discussion.
going to start being painful because we're going to start multiplying by, 12 kids on a team and blah, blah, blah. Okay, our next discussion for workshop is our board representative assignments for 2021. We do this every December meeting. We could try to figure out where our board members are going to be dedicating their time. We have 2 new board members, so they're going to have to figure out where they really want to go. We usually discuss this and then actually do not take action on it until at the end of the meeting, because we kind of say, oh, okay, I'll do that and you'll do that and that sort of thing. So I have the board representative assignments on 2021, and I'm assuming everyone has it in front of them. And the one thing that that people really don't understand is the first one, which is the Nominating County Committee on School District Organization Members. That is a committee that is made up out of the entire county. This is just the nominating committee, and one person from every school district needs to be on it. It is literally not even one meeting a year, and I have been doing it, and it's just really super easy. But if somebody wants to take over it, you just have to make sure the board knows when we're electing people to that particular county board that you're aware of it. But it's it's a kind of a do nothing. But it sounds like you're doing something very important. We do need to have a new representative to our SELPA, which is our Special Education Coalition. We need a new person for Operations Steering Committee. We need a new person on the Los Alamitos City District Working Group. So I think I know who's going to get that. And then we need another new person on the Seal Beach City District Working Group, and I'm pretty sure who's going to get that too. I am up for re-election for the North Orange County Regional Occupation Program, which is a career technical ed consortium. And I would really, really, really like to do it again, but I'm just putting a plug in for me. Marlis, you have been on the West Orange County Ledge Committee. Do you want to say something about that?
No, because with COVID, I never went.
Okay. That was, in the past, it was a part of cities and chambers and school district, and I usually met on the base, so sometimes they were there, and we discussed any legislation that was beneficial to everyone. I was on it for about a year and a half, and I remember we wrote one letter supporting something for schools, so I was glad we did that. Safety Task Force, Diana, we have an opening on that. Do you want to discuss what that is?
Yes, we used to have a variety of different, and you'll see in the smaller font, task force, and we just kind of compiled them and put them all together. And so it identifies, because we put so many of these programs into place that sometimes we just have to revisit them or look at them, or just like what we're dealing with the policy that's on the board today, that issue came up with wellness. So it's a broader base than just, we call it safety, and it's not just the physical safety of our schools. It's also all the things that keep our students healthy and happy. And so.
Okay. The next committee is the DAC and DLAC, and that has to do with, that's our district advisory committee, and it has to do with our LCFF concentration funds, which is not a significant amount of money in our district, but we meet together as a group. There's parents on there, representative from all the school sites. I believe we meet twice a year, 4 times a year, but it's COVID and nobody knows when they're meeting in ever again. We meet 4 times a year, and we discuss the budget, how much money we have, and how we can positively impact all of our students, but specifically those who may be foster youth, English language learners, low income. And that's one that Marlis and I have been on. Our special education PTA committee, and would you like to speak to that, Diana, because I've never been on that one?
Sure. So we have and in fact, Mrs. Delk did a great job last week. We have a group that's a PTA group that is for special education parents, and it ranges from TK all the way through to adult transition. And so it's how they can support the special education through the PTA. And for me, it's been a special place in my heart. So, but that's what that committee is. And I think that because it's run by the PTA, I think it may be every 2 months, if I recall correctly. So, and then they have a meeting, and then they'll structure the meeting. One will be in the morning, and then the next one will be in the evening. The next, they go back and forth just to make it more accessible to parents.
Okay, the next committee meeting is our Csd Working Group, and Diana's on that, and there's probably somebody else who'll be on there who lives in Rossmore, because it's always good to have a person who lives there to be on that committee. And then we have our Human Relations Task Force. That came up out of our concern for diversity, equity, unconscious bias, what we can do to support all of our kids. And Marlis, would you like to speak to that?
Well, this was one that Meg very generously gave up her spot last year so that I could be on it. It's very dear to my heart. that was an outcry out of some issues that were happening in the community, and I think the district responded with incredible strength and heart. We are looking at curriculum, parent workshops, ways to support teachers, get them for like restorative practices training about unconscious bias. I believe the Human Relations Task Force has taken on the issues at hand right now with full force and support of the district. So it's a wonderful, very diverse community, and not just diverse in the sense of human relations, diverse in all the tasks that they've taken on.
Right.
And then
subcommittees.
I just want to remind, we have rebranded it slightly. It's now the Human Relations Advisory Council or
Advisory
Committee. So we'll make that change here. And just for, obviously, I think the board's well aware, the reason that we have these assignments is because anytime, all of you are subject to the Brown Act. So the Brown Act limits, and if you are in a room talking about any district business with more than 3 people, that it has to be agendized and publicized, et cetera, which is why you can have no more than 2 representatives. Because obviously all of you would like to be on all of these committees, I would imagine.
Yeah. And just to give our new board members some more information, and which you guys have probably already figured this out, but the names in red are the ones who are no longer with us, and so obviously they're open. We need to go into closed session, so I'm going to ask, because we are going to bring this back and discuss it at the end of our meeting, and we'll make our decisions then. But do you guys have any, Scott or Chris, do you have any questions right now? No? Okay. Then what I'd like to do is we'll go ahead and go into closed session, and we will return at 6:30.